Does this make sense to you? Canadian prisoners developing deep, meaningful, loving, protective, and trusting bonds with their therapy animals, only to exploit them and betray their trust by forcibly inseminating them, removing their babies at birth, holding the mothers in servitude, and after they're deemed useless after years of giving birth and being milked, these inmates must either relinquish their friends to the slaughterhouse or perform the killing themselves, all for slave labor wages in a scheme for the Canadian government to profit by selling goat milk infant formula to China. And all of this done under the guise of animal therapy and inmate rehabilitation, leaving prisoners very conflicted by basically saying it's okay to take advantage of or harm vulnerable beings. Twisted, huh? But our guest has a better idea. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Calling All Vegans. I'm Sue Spar. This is my friend and co-host, Alec Bosse.
Hi, everybody.
Our guest is a devoted stay-at-home dad and homeschooler to his son. He is also an animal activist, a critical thinker, a speaker who tackles very difficult topics, an author, a full-time social justice advocate for the oppressed and disadvantaged, and along with his mom, the co-founder of Evolve Our Prison Farms, a national grassroots movement advocating for ethical prison farms in Canada and defending animal, prisoner, and environmental justice. Sounds pretty good to me. Please welcome Calvin Neufeld to Calling All Vegans. Yay!
Thank you so much, Sue and Alec. I'm delighted to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you were last on the show April 2018. I rewatched that one. Much has transpired since then, and we will be discussing that. But I first just wanted to touch on the Suffering Eyes book and project, which is a team effort between you and your mom, Franceen Neufeld. I purchased the book a few years ago, but I've only been able to read a few pages because I felt this overwhelming sense of kindred with your grandma, who was a lifelong protector of animals. And honestly, it just really shook me. So I will pick it up and I will get through it, but can you just tell us a little bit about the book and project and how others can get involved in fundraising for farmed animal sanctuaries?
Well, the book was something that emerged very much organically as a result of my mother's experiences of awakening to the suffering of animals midlife. That's why it's called Suffering Eyes, a Chronicle of Awakening. Because those of us who have had that shift in seeing how we see the world and what happens to animals in the world, it's a process and this unraveling of everything we once thought and believed and our own implication in the suffering that's all around us and typically out of sight and out of mind. So opening your eyes to that suffering lets that suffering in. And we experience the suffering alongside of that. And so for my mother to chronicle that process while she was going through it was very important, and it was very much a healing part of it. It's just a beautiful work, and I had the honor of being able to go alongside her through that process as the editor and the publisher of the book. And it was just a labor of love for this both. And I'll tell you, as we worked over every page, every sentence, every word, there were tears. Yeah. It was a genuine,
Absolutely.
It was very, yes. And yet it's not the kind of book that exposes you to so much more than we are already aware of. Rather, we have faced that awareness, faced that suffering, suffered along with it. And then this book articulates that and gives us words, and we're not alone with the feelings and the grief and the suffering. So to me, it's very much a companion. I love the book, and every time I read it, I cry. And even when I think about it, I often tear up. And when I quote it, sometimes I barely can, because it's that powerful and that beautiful and tender. So I'm very proud of my mother, and I'm proud of the book. And I did the painting that's on the wall behind me here, and that became the cover of the book. After we published, well, as we were finished the draft of the book, I went up into my room for 3 days and just started painting, and I've never painted before, and that was what came out.
Wow.
So
I'd be afraid what would come out if I went up in my room for 3 days, and I don't want to know.
that's funny, Sue. So yeah, and all proceeds support farmed animal sanctuaries, and their sanctuaries are popping up all over the place.
Yeah.
So people can find your local sanctuary, donate, especially around Christmas time. And during this pandemic, sanctuaries need more support than ever. And they are doing the frontline work of rescue. So please just, look up your local sanctuary or the one that you love most here in Canada or anywhere in the world, and donate if you can.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about the motivation for Evolve Our Prison Farms, and what are some of the advantages of the model that you're proposing?
Well, Evolve Our Prison Farms started in 2016, and it has been a journey since then. I never thought that this would become my life the way that it has. I've become a full-time prison farm activist now for many years, and it just started off as an idea. The government wanted to bring back prison farms, which used to be dairy, eggs, and meat production for prisons, including abattoir work. When the farms were shut down under Harper, they closed all the farms, but they kept the abattoir work.
Oh, yeah.
But no longer to serve meat into prisons. It became for external markets, and all of the food for prisons was outsourced. So then when the Trudeau government said, hey, we're going to bring back prison farms, let's seek some public input into what the farms could look like. We've worked with sanctuaries. I've worked in environmental consulting. I know a lot of innovative farmers. Here we can model, therapeutic rehabilitation. We can have animal assisted therapy if it's done under very careful conditions, just like a sanctuary would be expected to operate with transparency in terms of the animal treatment and care and the protection of those animals. And then we can also model climate solutions with innovative green agriculture. And this is in line with everything that our government cares about, or at least claims to care about. We thought it was a slam dunk. It just makes sense. The whole world needs to evolve. We need to do better than we've done in the past. And this was just the perfect opportunity. So our proposal, we felt, had significant advantages over what prison farms used to do. But unfortunately, the government and the Correctional Service of Canada are taking a very different direction, not just reintroducing dairy operations, but industrial dairy operations for the private sector, and most likely infant formula exports to China, which raises human rights violations, labor concerns, the treatment of those animals, and just how the treatment of prisoners and the treatment of animals are suddenly this very dark mirror of each other. So it's just become a cause that I haven't been able to let go of. I'm very passionate about it.
I'm so glad, that you took it up and you've just stuck in there. So, and we will be talking about that, definitely.
So the name Evolve Our Prison Farms was the one that you settled on, but prior to that, you guys were tossing around some different ideas kind of jokingly. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What was the proposed one? And tell us a little bit.
You're going to go there, are you?
Right there.
We went there.
You've done your homework. I did write an article a couple of years ago about what the beginnings of this, when we were trying to come up with a name for the campaign, because we did partner with some academics and some other activists, and thought, what can we call ourselves? So we kind of joked, threw some names out, and the one that got us laughing was Bullshift. Because we recognize that this whole thing needs a complete shift in the way that we look at prisoners, rehabilitation, agriculture, farming, and animals. And the idea, when the farms were shut down, it generated a lot of opposition, particularly from local farmers and the National Farmers Union, saying, no, we're going to defend farming, we're going to defend dairy particularly, and you can't say that dairy is not relevant, or that using prisoners in dairy operations will not result in jobs, because that's what the government said. They're not coming out and becoming farmers. So this program costs a certain amount of money. It's not necessary. It's not relevant to rehabilitation or employability. Therefore, we're shutting them down. And that offended a lot of farmers. And they said that working with the cows taught empathy. And they claimed that part of the reason it has to be dairy rather than animal-assisted therapy is that in dairy, the cows are all mothers. And that was just very unsettling to someone who has had that awakening to the suffering of animals and the realities of animal agriculture. And calling dairy work therapeutic, we felt that made the term bullshit.
Yeah, that is absolute bullshit.
It is. It is. But, you know, we did have academics involved, and as much as we might have thought that this was sort of a cute idea, we wanted something very serious in our name. And so we recognized that this is about the campaign to stop the prison farms closing was called Save Our Prison Farms. And then when they closed, they became Restore Our Prison Farms. And so we said, we are Evolve Our Prison Farms.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, nice.
So the model that you are proposing, has it been done in other places, and how did that work out?
Yes, it's been done in other places. There's no one-size-fits-all model, but we can look to other countries and even other parts of Canada that have done vegetable production for food banks, for example, which makes sense because then the work is directly related to addressing needs in society and helping the vulnerable and helping the poor. And this is something that prisoners express wanting to do. Mm-hmm. So it's not work for work's sake, like industrial dairy for Chinese infant formula. That's labor, rather than contributing to the betterment of society and the healing of individuals who participate in that process.
Well, they don't want to work for the man either, right? Like, who wants to work?
That's it.
Brother?
You talk to prisoners, the man. They don't want to work for the man. Yeah. I've heard that so many times. That's just part of the lingo. And the man is the institution, it's the system, it's the authority, it is the imbalance of power. And the way that human beings are treated in our correctional system is very, very abusive and oppressive. We do need, as a society, to have ways to respond to crime, but it should be a response that addresses the root causes and contributors to crime, like mental health, like addictions, like poverty, like racism, and just other forms of oppression. But the system that we have in place now actually only results in people who are more bitter and more broken coming out the other end. And that has actually increases the threat to public safety rather than contributing to public safety. So the system itself needs to change. It needs to evolve. And we can look at other countries, Norway, and even in the US, they have some far better examples than we have here. They have worse examples as well. But in Florida, they have the Sheriff's Office Animal Farm that is an animal rescue out of prison. It started off with just rescuing some injured ducks that were hurt on the roads, and then they've rescued hundreds of other animals, and inmates care for these animals for their natural lives, grieve when those lives come to an end, and can't imagine what Canada is doing in introducing industrial animal agriculture and using prisoners in slaughter work, being paid very, very small amounts of money, less than $1 an hour. With no worker protections or human rights involved, really. So,
well, yeah, I mean, the whole thing, like what the government is rolling out, is just truly warped and perverted. So it's not only the horror that the animals are enduring, who, by the way, have committed no crime, yet they are being imprisoned. But it's how, as you say, it affects prisoners. And inmates do run the full spectrum, from those who've committed heinous crimes, those who are innocent, and those who've received sentences which are disproportionate to the act committed, or I guess where the time don't fit the crime. And many of these people are vulnerable. Like, prisons are kind of like a microcosm of the real world of society. So some of these people are abuse survivors, some have been oppressed by poverty and racism, and where, you know, some might actually be violent psychopaths. They're all in there for some degree of rehabilitation, yet they're being asked to engage in this sick behavior. Like, honestly, who slaughters their therapy animal? So, I mean, this, like you say, it really is a big risk, having these people released back to society when they're even more broken and traumatized and desensitized. So,
and when we can be accomplishing the very opposite more easily and at a smaller cost than this terrible farming model that is being introduced, that any average farmer, if you talk to even your average dairy farmer or your average beef farmer, they will say they don't like an industrial operation like this. You talk to goat farmers and say the welfare of those animals is going to be absolutely terrible. We're talking about up to 3,000 goats in a fully indoor facility, and these animals will never be pastured, and they'll be bred, inseminated, and their offspring taken away. The goat dairy industry also has a particularly high infant mortality rate. It's about 4 times higher than in cow dairy. So you're going to have an awful lot of dead kids and the prisoners who are often traumatized by their life history, which is almost always associated with trauma. And they themselves are very, very often victims of crime as well. And then they're traumatized by the experience of incarceration. And then they're going to be traumatized yet again by being surrounded by suffering and death. And that's what it is. And I'm not going to pretend that dairy is pretty and that it's therapeutic and that it's bucolic. So we just can't ignore the realities for the sake of some nostalgic sense of what farming is, because that's what I come up with all the time is, I remember being on the farm as a kid, and I loved those cows. Usually it's cows. There are not many people who grew up on a goat farm or really know about that.
Yeah, not in Canada, for sure.
But people remember their childhood memories. But this is not about nostalgia. This is about a rehabilitation program which should be based on science, on the best evidence, and an evidence-based approach to the rehabilitative process. We're not talking about farming. We are talking about rehabilitation, and that should involve no violence, no suffering, and no death.
Very good. Now, to put it mildly, you've not had as much forward movement as anticipated, and that's due largely to the government's shenanigans. I better put my glasses on because I had a couple of things I wanted to say about this. You're 4 years into this, and you've been thrown under the bus, witnessed conflicts of interest, lack of political impartiality, been paid lip service, seen a mockery of democracy, a silencing of voices, suppression of evidence, and backroom deals and handshakes. You've made more than 50 Access to Information Act inquiries. You've submitted petitions with many thousands of names, yet you were refused meetings with former Minister of Public Safety, Ralph Goodale, who very gladly met with those with a vested financial interest. And despite corroboration from numerous experts in criminology, climate change, and animal abuse, endorsements from politicians and public figures, here we sit. Now, this has been a cover-up worthy of a W5 or Fifth Estate investigation. What are your next steps?
Our next step, we always have something in the pipeline. We've always got another card up our sleeve.
I know you do.
So our next major step is that we are going to be releasing what we were originally calling an alternative business case for the prison farms. So we went through a recruitment process, and through a grant, we hired 2 individuals who are both prominent academics to draft an alternative business case. So part 1 is going to be deconstructing the current model, all of the problems in terms of the environmental impact, the animal welfare, the labor issues, which really do border on an illegal program in Canada under international human rights standards for prison labor, and also the impact on surrounding communities, the decrease in property values that come with an industrial operation of this scale, and how it will impact the correctional institution as well, and risk of zoonotic illness and other issues that will impact the broader institution. Part 2 is going to be constructing the alternative model, what could be done under the right circumstance, and basically building the theoretical and practical framework for an ethical prison farm program. But we're no longer calling it a business case, because that's not what this is. It's going to be a report. And it will be something that will really it will generate a lot of media attention and a lot of political attention as well, and academic attention. So we are really only just beginning to get steam here. People are starting to pay attention to what's happening, and whether you live in Kingston, where the prison farms are coming, or anywhere in Canada or anywhere in the world, this is a matter that affects us all. The use of prison labor and the kind of programs and agriculture that our government is getting behind and endorsing in light of the climate crisis and in light of everything that we know, we can do better than this terrible model being introduced in the 21st century.
Absolutely. So on the notion of, using science and growing academically to move forward with things, the Canada Food Guide was recently updated. How is animal agriculture contrary to the Canada Food Guide?
This is for Justin Trudeau. This is a question for you.
The revision to the food guide was absolutely wonderful and reflected the best science and did not allow industry to have a disproportionate influence on considerations that went into this food guide. So for the first time, the food groups were eliminated. Dairy is no longer its own food group. The food guide recommends water, not milk, as the drink of choice. And the emphasis is placed on plant-based proteins for health and environmental reasons. And beautifully, I also found that this food guide also talked about the social importance of food and the joy of eating and the connectedness and community that it builds. So when it comes to something like our prisons, why are we not looking for a farming model that reflects Canada's food guide? As federal institutions, they do need to adhere to the food guide. So for one thing, they should be eliminating the powdered milk and powdered eggs that they send into prisons. There's no reason for it. And you know what? The inmates hate it anyways. It's disgusting. So why are we doing this except to maintain massive financial contracts with the marketing boards? And originally when the government was looking at reopening prison farms, everybody thought the farms were going to be feeding prisoners like they did in the past. It took everyone by surprise that the new prison farms cannot feed prisoners at all because of those contracts with the marketing boards that were put in place after the former farms closed. So now the food guide really, what happens with the prison farms doesn't have to adhere to the food guide because it's serving private companies now, which is its own violation. But at the same time, the principles of the food guide should be reflected in a federal program like the prison farms, and right down to that joy of community and the role that food can play in a healthy life with mental health and connected communities. It is so frustrating that after all these years, we not only are not seeing a good model introduced, but this is a violation of everything I care about and everything that the average Canadian cares about as well. So we need to fight this. We cannot let them.
They're not even aware of it. So should they? That's the thing, right?
It's been kept very quiet. Sue, your summary of everything we've been up against and everything we've encountered over these years was excellent. I couldn't have put it better myself. And the media has not done a service in covering this. The only coverage occurred early on that prison farms are coming back. Yay. Are the cows coming back? Yes, no, maybe so. Yes, then finally, because originally the cows were left out because they didn't want the cows. They wanted goat dairy because it was all about this infant formula deal. And goats have no quota associated with it, and cows do. And they knew when it was cow dairy for the prisons, they were exempt from quota because it was all used internally. Now that it's going out, they've got to deal with the quota system. So they didn't even want the cows. And so the news coverage was, oh, it looks like cows maybe aren't coming back. What a shame. Then finally the government decided, we got a bad PR problem. So let's add the cows back in, but it's not for prisons anymore or for the market because of quota. So it's going to research quota. They're going to inseminate those cows, take away their offspring, milk them, and dump the stuff. It's for nothing, which is so revealing of prison programs that are all about what they look like, not about the relevance, not about the value. I feel I'm sorry, but I do feel very angry about this. The more I've gone into the world of prisons and gotten to know the realities, the more emptiness and hollowness I see in everything. And that makes a program like the prison abattoir and industrial dairy at the prison for Chinese infant formula makes perfect sense. It's perfectly consistent with how the Correctional Service of Canada as a system operates. And I say this hesitantly because I feel that it's important to work with them, to encourage them to bring their programs into alignment with their mandate. Mm-hmm. But I'm also very frustrated because of what I've seen personally and what I've experienced.
Yeah. Well, you're a wonderful advocate, and honestly, we're really lucky to have you behind this, is all I can say. Now, this is a lighter question. You're a trans man and you chose Calvin as your name. And you've told me before that it's because of Calvin and Hobbes, the forward-thinking comic strip that ran from 85 to 95. Bill Watterson, the creator, has kind of taken himself out of the public eye. So since I can't ask him, I'll ask you. If Calvin and Hobbes were real, would they be vegan? Not bearing in mind that Hobbes is a tiger, an obligate carnivore, but he can have a vegan heart.
But he's a stuffed one.
A stuffed. Yeah.
You know, that's a wonderful question. I've never been asked that question before. I have to say yes. Not as a child. Calvin the child rails against this world, rails against expectations or rules or what he should do, and he almost resists what he should do just for the sake of resisting what he should do. But throughout the strip, you see tenderness over and over again. There was one comic where there was a bird that he found, a dead bird, and it becomes this series of comics as he wrestles with this compassion for this poor dead animal and life and death and grieving and crying for this one little lost life. Would Calvin have been vegan? Eventually, yes.
I agree.
Because that's exactly what that seed grows into.
Absolutely.
Well, and he also, in one of the strips, he does say, "Mom, are hamburgers made out of people from Hamburg?" And she said, "No, honey, they're made out of cows." He's like, "What? No!" And he refused to eat the hamburger.
Right.
So there you go.
So you mentioned earlier that we need to work with the individuals that are in the system so that we can make these changes happen.
Ooh.
Do you have any politicians that you wanted to give a shout out to that have helped you along the way?
Absolutely. We have had support from every political party, least support coming out of the Liberal Party, which is surprising because these are liberal values: human rights, climate crisis, innovation, and yet they are the ones introducing this terrible model. And I bet you that most liberal politicians are unaware of the new prison farms and the new model that's being introduced by their own party. So we do need to raise awareness, but we've had support from the Green Party, in particular, Elizabeth May, when she was leader of the party. We've had support from Paul Manley, who is the Green Party critic for agriculture and international trade. So on both counts, this is very relevant to his portfolio. And on a personal level, he's deeply opposed to the use of prison labor for the private sector. We've had support from the Conservative Party as well. A lot of conservatives feel that this is a misspending of public funds on a boondoggle. A boondoggle is a program that appears to have value but actually has none, and they're absolutely right about this. And they are actually advocating both for a better rehabilitative program. If we are going to be spending the money, let's spend it in an effective way. And we've even heard from conservatives who recognize the value of animal therapy in treating veterans or service personnel with PTSD. So they know what we're talking about and they understand it. And then, of course, the NDP as well has been supportive, and we are reaching out to NDP MP Jack Harris, who is the critic for international affairs and public safety. So, sorry, foreign affairs and public safety. So, yes, we have high hopes that with more political attention, we will see some change happen and some questions being raised in question period in the House of Commons soon.
Awesome. So if individuals wanted to reach out to you to set up things for like speaking engagements or to help out with Evolve Our Prison Farm campaigns, how would they go about reaching out to you?
Our website, evolveourprisonfarms.ca, our social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Facebook is where most of the activity takes place. Or just email me, info@evolveourprisonfarms.ca. Any number of ways to contact, and I will talk to anybody. I love to have conversations. I want to hear everybody's perspective. I have talked to anybody that you can possibly think of, and I always benefit from the experience and anything that I can do to support the work that others are doing. Or any experience that others have had in the prison system. Very interested in hearing about everybody's experiences, whether you're formerly incarcerated or formerly employed or as a volunteer within the correctional service. And I would also like to point out that however critical I am of the system, there are good people working within it, and compassionate people, and in many cases, vegan people. I know vegans who worked in Kingston in the prisons there, and they would hear the animals in the abattoir crying and wailing, and how traumatic it was for these staff members. And if it was traumatic for them, how traumatic would it have been for the prisoners working in there, or the prisoners in the institution who could hear it? And I also know a vegan prisoner who was made to work in the abattoir. Otherwise, he would have been transferred to another institution. So we need to care, and we need to swing open the doors on prisons and open the doors on animal agriculture and abattoir work and the violations of every decent thing in these places, and work to make them better.
Absolutely. Calvin, thank you again for taking some time and meeting with us. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you and get to know a little bit more about the program and where it's progressing.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And at the end of the show, we will be showing a video of Gerretsen throwing Evolve Our Prison Farms under the bus. One of my favorites. What a guy. Anyway, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It's been a long time coming, so we'll be doing another update again. Hopefully all of this will, come to something.
I look forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition on behalf of 25 members of my community who call on the government to discard plans for a goat dairy prison farm at Joyceville Institution to prevent the use of animals in prisoner rehabilitation programs, except under sanctuary animal therapy models. Mr. Speaker, I would add that I find it extremely important to always represent my constituents and bring forward petitions as they present them to me. Unfortunately, with this particular one, I don't particularly agree with the content of it, and I think my previous speeches in the House speak to that. However, I do I do see the need to make sure that their voices are heard, and as a result, I present this to the House today. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.